Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to All Saints Church. I'm Angel Scarborough. I'm the rector here at All Saints, and we're delighted to be partnering with the Belong Collective. Justin Douglas texted me, or when I get a text from Justin at 7 o'clock on a Sunday morning, I know something's up, right? And he said, "Can we do this thing at your place?" And I said, "Yes." And then we tried to figure out how we were going to do it, and it all came together very quickly. So we're very glad that you all came out tonight for Vote Common Good's Confronting Christian Nationalism tour. Just a few housekeeping items, and this is where I kind of get into my stewardess mode, right? Exact flight attendant. Restrooms are in the rear of the building. Everything's on this level. If there is an emergency, and we don't plan to have one, but they never happen planned, you can exit the building from where you came in. There are also 2 exits to either side. This one is not accessible. You do need to go downstairs. This one is at street level. So hopefully everything will be fine and we won't have to depart quickly. There are refreshments in the back. There's hot water for tea. There's high-test coffee and decaf. We got the high-test working now. There are plenty of snacks. Please avail yourself. And again, we are delighted that you're here for this program on Confronting Christian Nationalism. And I'd like to introduce Justin Douglas of the Belong Collective.
Angel, thank you so much. The conspiring, if you will, texting and being like, we've always talked about doing something together, been each other's cheerleaders from afar, well, not really from afar, right in the same area, but at the same time, haven't found something that we could collaborate on. And so really excited tonight for Vote Common Good and this particular Christian nationalism training, confronting Christian nationalism, to be something that we could partner on. I just want to say, so my name is Justin Douglas, lead pastor at the Belong Collective. We're in a series right now talking through politics and the politics of Jesus. And this morning we talked about the moment where Jesus flips the tables, And I think one of the things that's interesting is in that moment, Jesus is calling the powerful to reconsider the way they hold power. But he's not trying to set up his own power in the process, And so much of what I think we're going to see today is this desire for power. And I think all of us, it's important for our faith to consider how we hold the power and privilege that we have and how much of that looks like the Jesus we claim to follow. And so I'm really excited tonight. I'm hoping to learn a lot, and I hope you'll learn a lot. My friend Doug, I'm going to introduce Doug. He's going to come up here and talk to you. Doug might not tell you this, but him and I have been arrested together twice. So, we're friends. If you've been arrested with somebody, you're immediately friends with them. All good arrests in the sense that we were calling into question some of the policies and things around death penalty and gun violence. And ultimately, I really trust his leadership. He's spent a lot of time advocating for things that I think are just like Vote Common Good says, common good in our communities and in our nation and ultimately even in our world. And so I look forward to hearing from him today. Thank you for being here, Doug. Doug Pagitt.
Hey, thank you, Justin. Thank you, Angel. Hey, and thanks to all of you for being here tonight. Someone had asked earlier, they said, what number of events is this that you've done on this tour that you're on? And I said, I don't know. Seems like a reasonable question. I should look it up. This is our 26th event that we've done since September 22nd. Our first event was in Pittsburgh on September 22nd, and then from there, we ended up driving all the way down to Arkansas and did some events, and then down to Texas, all the way down to the Austin, the capital of Texas, and then back up, and we were in Kansas, and then through Wisconsin and Michigan and Ohio, been in Pennsylvania again. We're gonna be moving back and forth between Ohio and Pennsylvania and Michigan over the next 2 weeks. So we're out and about, and super glad that you're here tonight. Frankly, we're glad when anybody shows up to talk about this, so we appreciate you being here. And also, I really wish we didn't have to be here. It was probably 4.5 weeks ago that we pivoted some of the work we were doing. We knew we were going to be on a tour. We have a bus out there, that says Faith, Hope, and Love, not insurrections and Christian nationalism. Looks similar to that banner. But we didn't know we were going to be running these training events until just about 4 weeks ago, which is why just a few weeks ago we contacted Justin and said, our schedule's coming together to be in the Harrisburg, Hershey area. Could you host this meeting? Because it's become increasingly clear that Christian nationalism is on the rise and has great impact in our society. It's in our media, it's in our churches, it's in our families, it's in our politics. And to be blunt, most of us would say no to Christian nationalism. But then if someone says, say a little more about what Christian nationalism is, it's like, well, I'm not entirely sure how I want to describe it, right? I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but that's some of what we're going to do tonight. And so on behalf of all the people who have been part of putting this curriculum together, some of you are going to see on the screen with Amanda Tyler and Andrew Whitehead and Sam Perry and Michael Waters and Catherine Stewart and Christy Berghoff and Stephanie Spalding and Shane Claiborne and others. We've been thinking about this for about 1.5 years. We put together a curriculum after the attacks on the Capitol building on January 6, 2021. We thought, well, we need to bring experts together, so we did that. We did 6 sessions online and have those videos available for you. And then we've edited those videos down actually into curriculum that's on the votecommongood.com website. And you could go there and you could then put a small group together to discuss it. And there's a downloadable PDF that helps you follow it and sort of put a conversation together. But as we were starting this tour, we realized that's not even enough. We need to start getting some people together into some rooms. So over the last month, we've been building this curriculum. What you're going to see tonight, we hope feels fresh to you. Some of what you're going to see tonight has just gone into the presentation today and tonight. Some of it because of some pieces that we saw. Maybe some of you even saw the Frontline special called Michael Flynn's Holy War on PBS by Frontline. We'll commend that to you to take a look at as well. So this is all happening in real time. Now at Vote Common Good, we do a couple of things. We advocate for faith voters, especially people from the tradition that I come from, which are evangelicals. I come from this little stream of evangelicalism some people don't even know exists, the progressive evangelical stream. It's more of a little babbling brook, maybe even than a stream, but there's a little piece of it that some of us are in. Every faith tradition has its more conservative and more progressive sides, even evangelicals. And so I come from that crowd, and we do work to help white Catholic voters too, and evangelicals who sometimes feel that their political identity and their faith identity came as a package deal. Almost like they went to Wendy's and ordered the number 2 and it just came with the fries, and they said, well, I won't eat the fries, and then by the time they got home, oh, we all eat the fries on the way home, we all know that. And sometimes you want to swap those fries out for a side salad. But sometimes the restaurant says, we don't do any substitutions. Some people feel like their faith identity and their political identity came with no substitutions allowed. So they just have to vote Republican and no other choice. We don't tell people to not vote for Republicans. We believe they'll do all the work for you. They're like a self-cleaning oven. You can figure that out. But you don't have to vote for anybody. It's your conscience. It's your choice. It's your vote. It's your faith that can drive you. So that's what we typically do. But we also have to make a really clear point, and some of this Christian nationalism training is about this. We're not asking for our candidates to fulfill a Christian agenda in the United States or at our cities or our states. We're asking voters to be compelled to the common good, and their faith should call them to the common good. But their faith should not be the responsibility of the government. And this is a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have. So we're going to get into some of that tonight. 3 big topics for us tonight. What is Christian nationalism? I want you to have a working definition of it and feel really comfortable being able to talk about it. I like to think about our ability to describe things in a 1-word, 10-word, and 100-word frame. Some things you should be able to answer in 1 word. Some things it might take you 10. Some you need 100 words. When someone says to you, "But do you love me?" The 100-word answer is not a great one, right? Give them a solid yes or a no. Don't start with "it's complicated. Can we talk about dopamine levels? Can we talk about the meaning of love?" Some people are really comfortable. They hear Christian nationalism and they just say no. We want you to have a 1-word, a 10-word version, a 100-word version, so you feel comfortable talking about it, understanding what it is. Why do people use the phrase? Where does it come from? What are the complexities that are in play with Christian nationalism? It's a phrase that most people don't use to self-identify. A small percentage of the population does. But it's still an operative form, and it's an accurate description for a lot of people. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about what churches can do in response to this, institutions, organizations, collectives. And we're going to talk about what you can do. Our goal is for you to leave with a deeper understanding, less afraid, and more willing to engage with empathy. What we can't have any more of in this country is us and them, enemies and victims, and feeling like we don't understand each other. So we're going to show you a lot of things tonight in our definition of Christian nationalism and a way to understand it. The purpose of it is to humanize it. These are not just ideas. These are beliefs that people hold. And people are the operative word there. I'm going to do everything I can to describe what I understand Christian nationalism to be, why people are attracted to it, and how it functions in the world, in a way that if someone who holds these views, I have 2 people in my mind, and I imagine them sitting right here, and I want to speak about all of this in such a way that if they were sitting here and listening, or if they're watching on the live stream at home, and by the way, we're live streaming this on the All Saints Hershey YouTube channel and the Vote Common Good Facebook pages, so if you have friends that you want to click into this now, they can. That if they're watching it there, if they were sitting here, these friends of mine who are Christian nationalists, that they would say, "Yep, you got it right. You didn't caricature me. You didn't overstate. I don't think there's any need to overstate the threat of Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism in and of itself is clear enough and I think worrisome enough that we can talk about it." So I'm going to begin with this premise. I think Christian nationalism is real in this country and it's really worrisome. Part of it is what happened on January 6th, and we'll talk a bit about that, but it's also what's happening in our politics right now. We're going to show you 3 clips tonight from an MSNBC special that was on about 6 weeks ago. It describes the election of Mayra Flores as the congressional representative from the 34th Congressional District in Texas, down on the southern border. I know that place because we did a bike ride a year ago, started on September 11th, and rode our bikes for 66 days across the United States along the U.S.-Mexico border, telling the story of immigration, then across the coast of Florida. Sometimes I feel like I have to remind the governor of Florida after our ride that no one is coming from Mexico into Florida, by the way. But anyway, we can get to a geography lesson later. So we did this ride to understand it. We rode through this town and we saw these signs for an election. The election was this June. Mayra Flores won, and she ran under a campaign that they referred to as the new MAGA movement. Make America Godly Again. And so it's attracted a lot of attention because it was a congressional district that flipped from being a representative from the Democratic Party to a representative, Mayra Flores, from the Republican Party. And also because of its deep Christian nationalism undertones in the election and what she's said. So they made a special about it. And that's part of why we decided to put these trainings together is I watched that special and thought we just need to do a little more than what we're doing. I think we all could do a little more than what we're doing. So we'll show you a couple of these. And again, there might be some points where you feel like you're shaking your head, like I don't know what they're talking about. What I would encourage you is if you get that feeling bubbling up, just remember these are our fellow citizens. These are people that proclaim the faith that you might proclaim. So you're in the same faith family. You're certainly on the same planet together. We share our humanity. We're fellow citizens. In other words, it's the we of we the people. So let's listen and hear and understand with a sense of we. Doesn't mean it's not threatening. It is threatening. It is dangerous. And the tradition of Christianity that I come from says Jesus welcomed all of those around him, deniers, betrayers, doubters, and others. So this is where we find ourselves. How do we engage with this? And there may be a bit of head shaking going on too, so feel free to let that happen, but let those head shakes sort of draw you into your deeper humanity. So you're going to meet a few people and see a few people here on these slides.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government, some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state, some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know, because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
Okay, so you saw 3 Congress people, one from Texas there, Representative Flores. You saw Representative Boebert from Colorado, Representative Green from Georgia, all saying something in the last number of months that sound like or expressly a call for Christian nationalism in the United States. This is part of the reason that we're talking about this now. We're going to get to some definitions of Christian nationalism here in a moment, but also the reason we're concerned about this is what happened on January 6th. This is video that you're going to see from inside the Senate dais on the day of the insurrection. A reporter for The New Yorker, who's a war correspondent, came in with the people who were the first in the building, including the people you're going to see in this video. They pray a prayer inside the Senate dais. You might recognize some of the people in the video if you pay attention to this, including a person who's often referred to as the QAnon shaman. The horns and the vest and the painted face is leading the prayer. Christian nationalism was not a bystander to the insurrection on January 6th, in my opinion. It was the reason for it. Not everyone who was an insurrectionist was into Christian nationalism, but Christian nationalism was a full-fledged partner in this effort. You're going to see a couple of pieces tonight that bring that about, including a meeting on January 5th, 2021, the night before the insurrection, which was called the Jericho March. And they marched around the Capitol building, invoking the narrative of the walls of Jericho to come collapsing down. Then the next day, they went in and took over the chamber, and this is the prayer.
All the way back to the monument, OPC.
Jesus Christ, we invoke your name. Amen.
Let's all say a prayer in this sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Let me take it back. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to these police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our rights, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists, that this is our nation, not theirs. That we will not allow the American way of the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, with your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine, omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent Creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine Creator God, for surrounding and filling us with your divine, omnipresent white light of love and protection, peace and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray.
Amen.
It is disturbing. It's disturbing to see that prayer, to know that that's what was the root for so many of those people. Now, is every Christian nationalist, is every person who holds to Christian nationalist understanding willing to attack the United States Capitol? I don't believe that's true. I know a lot of Christian, you're going to hear some statistics today that might shock some of you. That more than 50% of the U.S. population has Christian nationalists approving leanings. So is everyone there? No. But this is also not a standout. There's an entire movement of people utilizing Christian nationalism as the rationale for militaristic action inside the United States. You're going to meet some of those people as we go. Some of them are doing different kinds of organizing. They're organizing in churches. This person that you're going to meet here, Abraham Enriquez, he organizes the group that helps support Representative Flores. And you'll hear what he's describing and what he's talking about and the kind of work that they're doing.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize the Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms, so it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Myra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Myra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So if Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors and churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church, there will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, and country. Why do you think those 3 words resonated so much?
It is...
With Latinos specifically.
It is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith. Faith in something. Faith in having, understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator. being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Meyer Flores was able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country. You know, those are her words. Do you support something like that?
100%. 100%.
Okay, there's a lot going on there, right? There's that long conversation. He's articulate about his understanding of how they want to engage with Latino voters. And look, people should be able to organize voters. That's what we do, right? We shouldn't tell anyone not to organize voters. More people voting is always better than less people voting. Yes, let's do that, and let's have people make their argument. But when the goal is to move a conservative agenda toward Christian nationalism, now it's not only about motivating voters. There's another conversation going on. This is the kind of thing that has a lot of us unnerved. So let me make a couple of points explicitly clear. Christian nationalism is not about people exercising their faith, okay? You're going to hear this a lot. There are whole movements of people that are now saying, oh, all that Christian nationalism argument business, you know what that is? That's just trying to tell Christians not to be Christian in America. No, it's not. That's not what I'm talking about. That's not what any of the people you're going to see tonight are talking about. That's not what any of the sociologists or experts are talking about. That's not even what the true Christian nationalists are talking about. What Christian nationalism is about, it's about the government exercising the government's power to advocate for, derive its authority from, or privilege any particular faith. When it becomes Christian nationalism is when someone says, because the United States is explicitly a Christian nation from its founding or from the imagination of God when it started, and therefore Christianity has a privileged place in the country, the Bible has a privileged place in our society. When the government uses its authority in that way, that's when you stepped out of someone exercising their own personal faith and into Christian nationalism. We need to distinguish between citizens' motivations and the government's authority. My representative is Representative Ilhan Omar. She's a Muslim. I vote for her because my Christian faith calls me to vote for people that are going to care about the common good. That's my rationale. Her and I don't share the same faith, but I don't want her, even if we did share the same faith, as a lawmaker to be using her holy text as the rationale for laws. So I don't want her using the Quran, and I don't want a Christian legislator using Matthew 25 or 2 Chronicles 13 or Leviticus 4. Our government needs to be based on common law that involves all of us and not preferencing and drawing its resources. But here's where it gets complicated. My motivation as a voter is that my faith calls me to vote for certain people and not for other people. But that's where the line is drawn with voters as opposed to with legislators. And there's an awful lot of mixing that goes on in this world. So this is one of the things I want to help all of us sort of clarify, is to sharpen our focus a little bit between the free exercise of faith in our society, and sometimes we need to be careful because you'll hear people out talking about their faith publicly, even calling for passing of laws based on your faith. And I think you should do that. I'm very comfortable doing that. But the lawmaker needs to have other rationale other than my faith or her own faith for establishing a law. Right? That's the trick of a legal system, is it needs to be rooted in something other than a scriptural text. Because we all know the problem that can lead to, right? Which text, which interpretation, which person, which church, of course. Now look, we've been struggling with this as a country from the founding. We are in the great state of Pennsylvania. You all know the history of Pennsylvania. There was a time before there was a union when this was a colony and it preferenced certain religious narratives. But when we formed as a nation, those religious exceptions and bias were set aside, and in the Constitution and in Amendment number 1, is that Congress shall establish no religion or prevent any religion. We shifted. Not everybody's comfortable with that shift that happened 246 years ago. So we're still arguing about it. That's part of what's going on right now. The great state of Pennsylvania has a doozy of an argument going on right now for the person that's going to be the chief executive, the next chief executive of the executive branch of the state government of Pennsylvania. This group is one called the Family Research Council. The Family Research Council, Wednesday ago, on the 12th of October, held an online and in-person session similar to this, asking the question, the rise of the term Christian nationalism. Where did it come from and why is it being used? Okay, so very similar to what we're doing. We started on the 22nd of September. On October 12th, they're having this other meeting, bring a bunch of people together. If you're up for it, you can watch it all online. I'm going to show you just a clip from it tonight, but in case you think that you want to hear more of it, or just to be sure we're not wrongly characterizing what's going on, you can watch it. I think they make our points better than we possibly could, and I think it should cause somebody to be really concerned about Christian nationalism when you watch it. But part of what they're doing is playing with the term. They have a real problem with the term, and they are suggesting that it's an attempt to stop Christians from being Christian. Why do I think that? Because this is the poll question that they had during their session, and then they had people voting online and in person. Which of these answers was the answer that reflected those people who attended most? What is Christian nationalism? Well, there were 4 choices. I'm not certain about what it is, but it's definitely not what the left says. What is Christian nationalism? A creation of the media, or an attempt to intimidate Christians who care about their country, or all of the above. Those are the choices. What's not a choice is it's an active movement to give preference to some religions over others and to instill that's not one of the options. That is true and happening and worrisome, that it was an ideology that was funding the life of the insurrectionists and the people taking over school boards now, some of the stuff we're going to show you tonight. None of that is on there. It was either not what the left says, in other words, a false definition, something made up by the media, something to stop Christians from being Christian, or all of those. Probably doesn't take too much, watching of it to probably guess. Which one do you think got the most votes in the thing? All of the above. 72% or 73% of people said all of the above. Because we have to distinguish between the citizens' motivations and the government's authority, this little clip from that session is interesting. The person you're going to hear speaking is the pastor of the church. Now, he says something that might be fine for people in the faith that he identifies with to believe about themselves, but I think it's an indicator of the way some people think about their faith and the role of their faith. The conversation that they're having is a reflection on President Biden's comments in a speech where President Biden talked about the soul of the nation. And the pastor says, as you'll hear, the soul of the nation is not the business of the government, it's the business of the church. So here's what he says.
It's the right and privilege and duty and responsibility and honor of the Church of Jesus Christ to take care of the soul of America, in the sense that we have the gospel, which is the only good news that heals the soul of America, or any country.
So this idea that only Christians with the gospel of Jesus have a responsibility for the soul of America, in contrast to the government having some responsibility. This is one of the tension points. This is partly why when people hold this view, they say, well, if you're saying that we don't have a unique privileged place in this society, then somehow you're attacking our religion and our Christianity. So this is one of the talking points that will come up a lot. And if you end up in a casual conversation with someone whose answer to Christian nationalism is yes or maybe, and they don't have 10 or 100 words to sort of describe it, they would tend to applaud along with that, while it might make you feel a little uneasy or not sure how to respond. So some of what we want to do is help you figure out how to hear that response. Another place it shows up in this whole question about distinguishing between a citizen's role and the government's role and authority came from the former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, when he was the Attorney General. And he was announcing family separation as the policy of the Trump administration in response to people seeking asylum in the United States with their children, to separate them in order to send a message that if you cross our borders without our permission, even seeking asylum, which by international law you are allowed to do, but not by the law of the Trump administration that was in place, there will be a consequence of family separation. While explaining that, he invokes the Apostle Paul as the rationale for the law. Now, I am sure Jeff Sessions has a robust faith because he says he does, and I don't challenge that. But when you're the Attorney General, the Chief Law Enforcement Officer of the United States, your rationale for the laws that are being put into place by a presidential administration does not derive its authority from Romans chapter 13. So here's that clip.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
So this is the kind of thing that causes a lot of people to be very uncomfortable. It's also the kind of thing that causes a lot of people to say it's about time America gets back to its Christian roots. Okay, so it's the kind of thing you'll hear mentioned. These clips that I'm showing you that I think have sort of a warning narrative to them, my friends who support more Christian nationalist idea, they talk about these as features, not as flaws. Here's another piece that you all might be much more familiar with.
We have the power of God with us. We have Jesus Christ that we're serving here. He's guiding and directing our steps. And in November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so.
In November, we're going to take our state back. My God will make it so. I mean, how should a candidate talk about their faith? It's a good question, right? What's the means by which we talk about our faith? Yeah, we should be better at it. One of our encouragements is going to be churches. We should help people learn how to talk about civics and our faith in much more dynamic ways. Just saying separation of church and state isn't good enough. Right? It would be like doing, relationship work with teenagers and sex ed with teenagers and saying, just wait. Like, I don't know, just do the right thing. Like sometimes people need a little more than that to sort of figure out what's going on, right? There's a lot of passions afoot. People need a little more suggestion, a little more help. We could be better at it. I don't think the gubernatorial candidate is working very hard. I think he's saying exactly what he wants to say. But those are the kinds of things that are quite disturbing. All right, so Christian nationalism. There's some examples. This is what makes us say it's worrisome. That's part of the reason that we're traveling around the country and talking about this. This is the set of conditions we find ourselves in. You're going to see a bunch more clips as we go. And we could, I have to edit through this stuff, like should we use this one or that one or this one or that one? This isn't like scouring the internet and finding, the one or two spots. There's just copious amounts of this stuff because it's all over the place. So people have been studying this for a long time. You might be saying to yourself, Christian nationalism, boy, that feels like a new term. Maybe you only started hearing about it in 2016 or 2009 or 2006. It's actually a term that's been around for a while. Sociologists and journalists pay a lot of attention to it. You're going to meet someone named Catherine Stewart. She's one of our trainers on our online videos, and just think the world of the work she does. She's written a book called The Power Worshippers. Might be hard to read the subtitle here, so I'll read it to you. Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. Catherine is Jewish, and she told me the reason she uses the phrase religious nationalism is she said, I don't want to be the one, making it sound like we're against Christians, because it's actually a larger question than that. It's not just Christians, it's a whole movement of religious nationalism. And she's about to say something really important. That fundamentally, Christian nationalism is a political movement, not a religious movement. Now, some people come into it from a religious stream, but the work that she's done is really quite helpful. So this is Catherine Stewart. These videos, you're going to see a number of videos that look like this. This is Stephanie Spaulding and me, and then sometimes Christy Berghoff will pop on the screen. We hosted these conversations with these experts on Christian nationalism and spiritual leaders on Christian nationalism, and that's what's in these videos. Also what's on our website and other places as part of that curriculum for you. So all you're going to hear now are little short pieces from Catherine, but there's a much longer conversation if that's something that you're interested in, or if you want to pick up her book. And again, her book is The Power Worshippers.
Let's talk about what Christian nationalism is, and let's talk about what it is not. The first thing to know is it's not Christianity or even a religion at all, properly speaking. It's a political ideology, and its representatives insist that the foundation of legitimate government is bound up with a reactionary understanding of the Christian faith. It basically says that the United States is founded on the Bible, and that our country can only succeed if it stays true to this foundation. It's also a device for mobilizing and often manipulating large segments of the population by getting them to vote for the political candidates that the movement favors, and basically for creating a new elite, concentrating power in the hands of a new leadership cadre of people who subscribe to illiberal ideologies. It's important to know that it's a leadership-driven movement. It's not sort of bottom-up. It's not driven by the rank and file. It's a top-down movement. I want to say something else about what the movement is not. It is not just about evangelicals. I mean, it includes some evangelicals, but it excludes many evangelicals, including some white evangelicals and most evangelicals of color. And it also includes representatives of a variety of both Protestant and non-Protestant religion. Ultra-conservative Catholics, in particular, have become a critical element, and the movement actually even drives support from individuals and groups that do not identify as Christian at all. And what unites them is not a distinct theology, but a common political vision.
What unites them is a common political vision. This is super important. The reason people are all wigged out about this is that it's a movement utilizing the portions of Christianity, but it really has this political outcome, this political end to it, which makes it hard for some people to talk about. I can attest, most people in the country, they don't care about politics, and they don't want to talk about it. I mean, we run a group called Vote Common Good, like religious people and politics. I mean, we're just a blast at Thanksgiving. Like, just have us over. You know, if you're having a Friendsgiving, hey, invite a Vote Common Good friend over. That's really great. Most people don't want to talk about it. They don't keep up on it. It just feels negative. They don't want it. Most people even hold Christian nationalist ideas, don't think themselves to be political at all. They believe that they're just exercising their faith. But there's a political ideology, as Catherine puts it, that's leadership-driven. You're going to meet some of those people on video tonight that are pushing this agenda and combining these things together. So that's part of what's going on. Now, none of this is a secret or a cabal. There's nothing secret about the people pushing Christian nationalism. They're right out there, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene, Representative Greene, just says, I'm a Christian and I'm a nationalist and I'm proud to say we should be Christian nationalists. Like, I'm not suggesting that, hey, there's some secret place and we should get around and they're having secret meetings over in some other place and nope, they're just doing it right out in the business. They're just running for office and they're just representatives and it's right out there. So by saying that it's leadership driven is not to say the kinds of things that you'll hear actually from the Christian nationalist side, which is there's a bunch of secret power going on. The people that fund it, they're known, they're understood, it's all right out there. But it is a leadership driven effort. Your ordinary kind of people, they don't even know how to think about it. We'll talk about that in a moment. I'm going to introduce you here in a moment to Amanda Tyler. Amanda runs an organization called the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. you don't spend a lot of time around social activist groups and the progressive kind of wings, you might hear Baptist Joint Committee and religious liberty and have one idea in your mind. You might not think that this is the American Baptists who are calling for a deeper sense of separation of church and state for the benefit of the state and of the church. They're sort of, that Thomas Jefferson 1802 write the letter to the Baptist crowd. But that's who Amanda is. Amanda's group started an effort called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And she's a lawyer, their group are lawyers, and they do lawyerly work, and they put together a statement. She's going to talk a bit about it. But Amanda is just tremendous. I would commend Christians Against Christian Nationalism and their work to you. Any way you can be a part of it, get on their website, follow their stuff, follow them on social media, go on and maybe do the sign-on letter. Feel like you're part of what they're doing. They're really excellent. And here's Amanda.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org. The work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. One, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism. And so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols, and in some cases even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together, called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag, we can protest in the streets, we can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism, that's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
Super helpful, right? Amanda and Catherine are both just excellent communicators and really have so much important distinction to make. So I'd commend to you their work. And if you want those longer videos, to watch them, if this is something that you're like, I want a little bit more of this, well, after a couple hours tonight, you may not want more of this, but if you were to, a little while later, you might want to have some leftovers and take those with you. The next people we're going to introduce to you are Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead. They're two of the leading sociologists on this, one at Purdue University and one at the University of Oklahoma. They've written a book called Taking America Back for God, Christian Nationalism in the United States. I kind of wish their subtitle was The Problem with Christian Nationalism, just so you sort of knew which side they came on, but I'm not their editor or their cover designer. But they are describing the threats of Christian nationalism. And there's a couple of things that they're doing. They're sociologists, so they take studies Maybe you know how sociology works and how people end up saying what percentage of people believe this or that, in our population. Well, the way that happens is something like this. Now, you're not meant to read this. Just want to show you that there's a bunch of words and graphs. So, it's like when a doctor comes in with a white jacket on. She doesn't need to wear a white coat. White's not more sterile. It just makes you feel like doctors wear white coats. So, it makes you feel good. So, okay, there's statistics that make all this stuff work. They ask questions like, in the United States, should cities be allowed to put up religious symbols or keep religious symbols off of public land or don't have an opinion? Or public school teachers, should they be allowed to lead Christian prayer in school or not? Should the federal government stop enforcing the separation of church and state? Or federal government should declare the United States a Christian nation? These kinds of questions, right? And then people end up answering those questions in a particular way. So what Andrew and Sam did is that they took that plus some other questions that they put together and they created a scale. So they gave a point value to where people answered those questions and they put them on a scale. They're going to refer to this in a moment. That's why I'm sort of explaining it to you. And it's also just a really smart way for them to think about it. So from 0 to 1 point, where you were on that, would be what they call a rejector. And they have this continuum. They make a really important point in their writing and in our conversation that Christian nationalism is not a spot, it's not a point, it's not a single noun, it's a spectrum. So some people they would put way over here in the blue, some people they'd put way over here in the peach. Over in the blue, they call those folks the rejectors, the people who stand against Christian nationalism, don't want it to happen, want to speak out against it. I happily put myself in that category and invite you to put yourself in that category too. But then there's the resistors. Now these are people that are like, I'm not for Christian nationalism, but I'm not going to do? I'm not going to get on a bus or something and travel around and talk to people about it, or I'm not going to show up, on a Sunday night. I already went to church once today. I'm not going to get back in a pew, right? So they're going to be like, yeah, it's kind of a problem, but that's where I used to be, frankly. 5 years ago, maybe even 3 years ago, I thought all my friends were up in arms about Christian nationalism and talking about flags in churches, and I'm like, oh, for crying out loud, let's not worry about that. I mean, all the stuff churches can worry about, the flag, no big deal. Let's not stir the pot. Christian nationalists there are few, they're not a threat, couldn't have been more wrong. So I guess on that track record, don't trust me when it comes to Christian nationalism, all right? But then there's the accommodators. Well, let me jump over here. They would say on the far other extreme, there's the ambassadors. These are the people pushing Christian nationalism. These are the people advocating for it. Some of the people you've seen on the screen tonight, you're going to see these are people pushing it. These are the leaders. This is where the money is being spent, are the people advocating for it. But then there's the accommodators. The accommodators are sort of like the resistors. They're like, I'm not going to go out and recruit people, but Christianity is kind of the norm. And if it's the norm, then I guess if we're going to have a prayer at the football game, it might as well be a Christian prayer. That's how Andrew puts it. Andrew Whitehead, the sociologist. That's sort of a default. Sure, Christianity's that's how we start as a Christian nation. We welcome other people, of course. I mean, we're open and inclusive, sort of, kind of. And we're going to let other people in. But, first and foremost, it's Judeo-Christian. Sort of the same thing that if you've gone through any kind of racial training. I was at heard a training where the trainer said to people, how many of you are committed to diversity? Raise your hand. So people raise their hands, of course. And the trainer said, if you have your hand up, ask yourself the question, diverse from what? And if you meant diverse from white, then that's where we need to start. That your default is that white is the norm and everything else is diverse from that norm. Right? That's what people mean by white privilege or white starting point or white exceptionalism. Well, the same thing happens with Christianity, sometimes with white Christianity. That if your assumption is we should be a diverse country, what we mean is diverse from Christian, then you've started from a point, that's where the accommodators would be. I mean, let's get back to basics for sure, not overdo it. Be sure you're going to hear some people say this tonight. A pastor is going to say, well, the founders, it was Christian. They wanted to include other people, but First things first. Okay? So this is really helpful to think of people along a spectrum. And I would add, I'm over speaking for Sam and Andrew, I would add, people move on this spectrum. Maybe your work in your life is not going to be to get someone moved from being an ambassador to a rejecter, but maybe you could bump somebody just a little bit further over so we get a little more balance. Here's the struggle. Roughly 20% of people are ambassadors. Roughly 30 to 36% of people are accommodators. 56% of the US population would answer surveys that would put them in the accommodator or the ambassador category. In other words, this is not fringe. This is half, or slightly more, of all of us. So that's where we find ourselves. So this is Andrew and Sam, and you're going to hear from both of them. Andrew's going to start talking about that scale right there. He's just going to jump right in because it's where the video edit cut is. So that's what he's referring to here.
Yeah, well, I'll dive in first and then let Sam finish it off. So in our book, we performed or were able to get data on these large national surveys, and we asked respondents 6 different questions where they could strongly disagree to strongly agree with them. Things like, the United States is part of God's plan, or the federal government should advocate Christian values, or declare the U.S. a Christian nation. And so the degree to which people strongly agreed with those or strongly disagree, we assigned them point values, and we're able to create a scale by adding all those different questions together. And we did that because it's really important to understand that Christian nationalism isn't a binary, yes or no, but that Americans really are all along a spectrum, where some embrace it really strongly. Some, see, Christianity being a part of what we do in the U.S. is important, and others kind of resist that. Or the rejectors, who we see on the very end of the scale, say, there should be no fusion of this type of Christianity, which we define in our book is really this idea of a white, conservative, natural-born citizen. That's the Christian that they're talking about. American civil society shouldn't be fused to this type of Christianity. And so when we're able to create that scale, we can now look at, how do these respondents view the world? And there were 3 basic things that we tried to do throughout the book and were our main takeaways. Is the first, that Christian nationalism matters. And so Sam, he'll be able to share, even with his more recent data, that when we're looking at anti-democratic attitudes, or we're looking at policing of African Americans, if we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot-button issues, Christian nationalism consistently matters. Over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you're an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally, when we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or being a faithful Christian. Because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so Yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values three things primarily: power and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. That Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. That's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
So I've watched that a bunch of times. It's a lot what just came across there. Andrew says, look, Christian nationalism is not just a symptom, it's a predictor of other social beliefs. So it's functioning to cause other beliefs to be in order. And then Sam says it's power, boundaries, and order. You start to see that if you think back to the things we've seen already and what we're going to see. You start to see those frames laying out this call for power, boundaries, and order, and who's going to be in and who's going to be out. These become really operative forms in this. There's another bus tour. There's a couple of bus tours going on. One called the Power Interfaith campaign about Christian nationalism. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's out of Philadelphia. What was that again? Yeah, they call it the Freedom Bus. It's really great. They have some events happening in town. We're going to be with them on Wednesday up in Scranton at a meeting that's also happening with Network Lobby, which is the Catholic, the Nuns on the Bus people. We got our idea for the nuns for our bus from the Nuns on the Bus, so we're really good partners with them. They're moving around the country. We're sharing something with them. I think I saw some material out in the lobby. An event happening on November 4th at the Harrisburg, at the Capitol. So we invite you to that. You'll hear more about some of that stuff later. So buses are out and about, right? Candidates have buses. There's also another bus going around the country right now that's this Stop Abortions Everywhere in the Country bus. It comes from the group doing that work. And just so happened that their bus was parked in the same Hampton Inn parking lot as our bus. And the back of their bus says, honk if you know what a woman is. Okay? Order is what they're getting at. Power, boundaries, and order. That's where it comes from. Honk if you know what a woman is. I do. I know many trans people, and I understand what women are, so I honk our bus more now. They were leaving their meeting earlier and going over to the Creation Museum in Kentucky. That's where we saw them, and we were heading up to Cincinnati, so we didn't have a chance to powwow with them. But there's a lot of this going on. So people literally traveling around like we are, and that's also part of America, right? It's part of the we the people in all of this stuff. Okay, that's a lot, right? That's a little framework. What's Christian nationalism? How does it come at it? We're going to now start giving you some examples. So give a little breather to yourself. Thank you for getting up and walking down the aisle and coming back. By the way, there's bathrooms and refreshments and cookies because everybody brings something, right? She brought cookies. I said she brought cookies, and she goes, everybody brings something. That's such a great line. Everybody brings something. Okay, so if you want a cookie or any of the rest of that, because now I want to take you on the empathic part of the night. Okay, a lot of that's heady, like what is Christian nationalism? What is it not? Who's thinking about it? Okay, there's just a lot, right? So now I want to introduce you to what I would suggest are 5 components that make Christian nationalism attractive to people. How do 50 to 56% of people end up answering on surveys in a Christian nationalist way? Well, they're not just fools. They're not just making stuff up. There's some beliefs, some teachings, some assumptions of the world. Here's 5 doorways that people could enter in, I think would lead them to Christian nationalist assumptions. There, the belief that the country was started as a Christian nation and we should get back to our roots. There's a lot of temperamental stuff in here. I don't know if you do like Enneagram or Myers-Briggs or a lot of ways we come to understand people and how we are and how we all operate. Some people really are motivated by origin stories. How did it start? Because that's where things were the best, right? The tradition I come from, the evangelical tradition, loves to like tell a story of like Christianity being really great in like Acts chapter 2, where everybody shared everything in common, you know, like, I don't know a lot about that. But anyway, there's like a brief weekend and a half where everything was really great. And so you try to get back to an Acts chapter 2 sort of life, right? Or maybe Acts 28 or Acts 29, so 28 chapters. But they're like these origin stories, right? So some people are just deeply motivated by the belief systems that come from origin stories. Now, when you're talking with someone, or you hear someone presenting for whom origin story is their most important thing, they might not be talking about how God's work in the world comes through anointed people. They might just be up in here. And sometimes there'll be a blend of these. You're going to see some examples of this. Some people might be 1, some might be all 5, some might be 1, 3, and 4, like that kind of thing, right? So we can all come at this in different ways. But these are some of the reasons, attractions, doorways that get people into Christian nationalism. Origin story. The second, we're going to go through each one of these with just quick little examples of each one. Confusion between the word church and the word people. My golly, it happens all the time, right? So we'll get to that in a minute with a couple of examples. Seeing the United States as the new Israel. This is a really big one. And then Christians utilizing Jewish texts and symbols and tools in their Christianity. And a lot of use of Jewish scriptures, what Christians tend to call the Old Testament, and those narratives to frame their Christianity. And a lot of talk about the fourth area, which is a holy war narrative, that we're called the spiritual warfare, holy war, this kind of thing. You're going to hear about holy war business. And then the fifth is the role of the United States, the role of God's work in the United States and other nations is through anointed leaders. So these are some of the foundations that you'll hear people use to describe things that, again, they're very often not saying to themselves, oh, I'm a Christian nationalist. Like, referring to yourself as a Christian nationalist, I like to say, is like referring to yourself as a Midwesterner. Now, I'm from Minneapolis, so I'm a Midwesterner. You all from Pennsylvania, do you all consider yourselves Midwesterners? No? Well, over in Ohio, they call themselves Midwesterners, right? You all East Coasters? Is that how you see yourselves? So like this distinction, are we East Coast? Are we Midwestern? I don't think anybody in the Eastern time zone should be a Midwesterner. I think that, but anyway, I won't pick on the poor people in Michigan. They can be Midwesterners, fine. We won't have that fight tonight. But nobody wakes up and says to themselves, what a beautiful day to be a Midwesterner, right? Or an East Coaster, or an Atlanta, East Side, or a Floridian. But if you travel to other places in the country or other places in the world, somebody might say, where are you from? You're from, I'm from the Midwest. Right? So it marks you in a location that's accurate, even though it's not your identity. It's the way Christian nationalism functions for a lot of people. It's where they are. It's an accurate description, even though it's not as self-identifying. A lot of people aren't comfortable with somebody else putting that identifier on them. When somebody moves from Boston to Minnesota, they're like, oh, I'm not a Midwesterner. I've lived here for 67 years, but totally not a Midwesterner, right? Like that kind of thing, right? Because they make the distinction between these. So we're going to give some descriptions about all these. All right, so the founding of the nation, you probably already got that in your head. This is around all the time. I won't show you a whole lot about that, but it's the argument. Whether you want to have that argument tonight or not, we certainly can afterward. No, we were not. We were started from a very complicated family history and then decided not to be a Christian nation. That would be my suggestion to you. So let's move on to the second one. The church and people confusion, because this one's actually much more complex. Churches tend to talk sometimes to the people of the church reminding them that churches are not buildings, right? Churches are not institutions. Churches are the people. And then there's we the people. And then there's the church is the people. And then the we the people. And then the church is the people. And so let's wake up, church. Let's speak. So who should tell the government what to do? The people. That's right, church. You, the church, should tell the government what to do. You see how this language moves? There's a lot of this. I think some people use it intentionally to confuse the issues. You ask any Christian nationalist, if the church is supposed to lead the government, which church? Because I know churches, they can't even figure out how to run their own churches. How are they going to figure out how to run a government, right? I'm going to show you this sermon. Remember at the beginning in that little clip that we saw, there was this cutaway when Representative Boebert was saying, I'm tired of the separation of church and state nonsense. This is that sermon. It was a sermon that she gave at a church called Cornerstone Church. We're going to play 3 minutes of it rather than the 10 seconds. Sometimes it's just helpful. It's kind of like reading Bible passages. Read a couple verses before and a couple verses after before you get too committed to the ones in the middle, right? Like figure out what's going on. I think it's helpful to see how she gets into their comments, how she gets out of them, and what the context is, because it really matters. By the way, subtext to a lot of what's going on with the new Christian nationalism movement is a reaction to how our country handled the COVID pandemic. The big question for a lot of churches was, are churches to be seen as essential efforts? If the Walmart has to be open, why can't the church be open? Okay? Well, these are decisions that epidemiologists and public health people and senators and presidential advisors and governors had to make. It sits at the center of the new energy around Christian nationalism in the United States, and I certainly don't need to tell all of you in the state of Pennsylvania. Right? That's a huge portion of it. I bring that up because what you're about to hear from Representative Boebert is about that and this church and people sort of mix. Hers is like this unbelievable connection to all of these things, including the way she uses the book of Esther and pivots straight from Esther straight into you at your county commissioner's office. It's a particular style of communication and a particular hermeneutic that for people that have studied biblical interpretation can fire off that little itch in your brain for a moment. There's applause at the beginning because she's just said something about COVID. And then at the end, she says to the pastor of the church, thank you for your boldness. And she's referring to the fact that they wouldn't close their church. The pastor was arrested and charged with a crime. So that's the setting and the context that she's in. And I've been around Christian nationalist stuff. I went to the Michael Flynn deal and all this. That is a permeating conversation all the time. You're going to see a bit more of it tonight. So that context, where does the church fit in the role of the government and individuals? But the thing I really want you to notice is how the church and the people conversation just gets all wound together here.
Just because it comes from someone who's elected or a bureaucrat doesn't mean that it's right. This isn't about Republican and Democrat. This is about evil and good, right and wrong. And if you go to Esther 4, in verse 14, Mordecai is talking to Esther, and he says, for if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. Mordecai is telling Esther, if you remain silent, if you don't show up to your board of county commissioners, if you don't show up to your school boards, if you don't let your elected representatives know what's on your mind, deliverance will come at some point from another place, but not from you. And you will be stuck in that bondage and suffer and perish because of it. The dreams and the gifts and callings that God has on you will remain dormant. If you are silent, you lose by default. That's why I run my mouth often and give God glory. I don't want to lose by default. I don't want to be disqualified. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Now, we could take that scripture and make it really cliche. It sounds really pretty and it looks really good on the front of a notebook. But this is powerful because you are called to the kingdom for this time. You are called to be bold, to go out with power. You are anointed to set at liberty the captives. Esther had that revelation. She said, I won't remain silent. In fact, I will go to the king, which is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. The reason we had so many overreaching regulations in our nation is because the church complied. The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. That is not how our founding fathers intended it. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does. I will go to the king, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will open my church and allow my people to assemble, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. I will not mask our children in school, which is against the law, and if I perish, I perish. Thank you for your boldness.
Okay, it's a real doozy, right? So much going on. The Esther right into the county commissioners. We put this up. Nick, who you're going to hear from tonight, lives just down the way from this in Michigan, this Patmos Library, where a bunch of people didn't like a book that was in the library, and they voted to defund the library. Ran it out of money, called a millage. They didn't pass it in August in special election, so Nora Roberts, the author, has to float the library to keep it open so it can stay open until the election in November, see if they can get it back on the budget. Because people went to their county commissioners, because they went to their libraries, because they went to their school boards, because she told them this is what you do and how you act. Now it gets complicated, right? Yeah, sure, people should engage in political life. Yes, they should. But you could hear the difference between church and people, and the church should be telling the government what to do, not the government telling the church what to do. But does she really mean the people, or does she mean the church? It's a great question. I would love to hear her feedback on this. And then that little Christian anarchy thing. I mean, you know, as we heard, like, we get arrested, but when you get arrested in active, you know, in direct action, you put yourself under the authority of the law. So when we get arrested, we're saying we will let you punish us by the law to show that these laws are unjust, not we're above the law. This is the kind of law and order aggravating stuff that goes on in this Christian nationalism movement. So you hear it all sort of in there, that there's like this holy war where some people are going to be blessed and some people are not, and that becomes a root of all of this. Will the United States receive a blessing? Because a big part of this is to utilize this concept that the United States is the new Israel. That's crucial to people. When I mentioned to you that I sort of have in my mind a couple of friends that I imagine tonight are sitting right here, and I want to make sure that everything I'm saying about Christian nationalism, they would say, yep, that's fair, you got that right. I mean, I wouldn't say with that snark, but yeah, you got it right. I asked one of them about what he thinks about a lot of things, and he said, well, I said, is the United States, was it a Christian nation, founding? He said, well, here's what I think. There are only two nations that were born of an idea from God. The nation of Israel, the promise given to Abram, and the United States of America. Now, we could differ on all that, and Adam and I certainly do, and we have long conversations about that. But he says, like the younger, or the older, smaller brother, and the younger, bigger brother. What happens then when the United States is the new Israel is that which was said to Israel in the Jewish text is then applicable to the United States. This is why you often see the use of biblical passages from the Jewish text. A lot of Chronicles 13, 2 Chronicles 13, if my people, in fact, can people say that along with me? Do you know that passage? If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then I will heal the land. If we were in a charismatic Pentecostal or evangelical church and you said, if my people, bam, they would just kick right in, like me at a Bruce Springsteen concert when he strikes Born to Run. Like every word, got it, gonna nail this thing. Because that's a framing narrative. So we will pray so that God will heal our land and God is gonna run this nation. And over. Then it's King Cyrus and then it's Queen Esther. So much Queen Esther, such a time as this. So much holy war language, which we'll get to in a minute. But seeing the United States as the new Israel is crucial. And you know when you see it, because you see Christians using Jewish texts, Jewish artifacts of worship, including a shofar and prayer shawls and the sign of David on their church walls. So you're going to meet this pastor. This is the pastor of Myra Flores' church. He's the one that started the Make America Godly Again. They met at one of the Trump truck rallies, which they describe in the special. We don't have that here. But then on the back, he's got the Make America Godly Again banner on the back of the church, and there's the 2nd Chronicles passage right there. So what you're going to see here is sort of an illustration of seeing the United States as the new Israel, and it comes up over and over. You'll see a shofar blown in the church service and outside the White House and a whole bit of it. So this is, I think, a great example of this kind of thing. And this is extremely common. If you're not familiar with it in your tradition, it's very common.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. I mean, we like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? How do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know what? It's funny because that separation of church that always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just want to to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble. Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Myra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick you out of our states, and kick you out of this nation, and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is
politicians are elected to serve the people,
exactly.
right? To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah, but hold on, but we are electing them, so they're representing us.
And there's also Muslims that elect them. And
exactly.
I mean,
so that's what I'm saying. So now, as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
Are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Myra was just the beginning. It was just, she opened a door for other people to walk through.
I mean, you yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back for God.
That's right. And that was, let me tell you, if I died today, it was worth it.
From the United States Capitol to...
So that kind of thing is much more common than you might think. You could hear it all like that little list of all these things, you could hear it sort of blended in there, right? The beginning foundation narratives and the confusion between the church and the people, and we vote for them, and then we should have the supremacy and the states belong to Judah and belong to Christ, and it's just about voting, but not really, and we're the new Israel, and this is the completion. Then there's the holy war business. Spiritual warfares, the way some people would talk about it. This is a flyer for the Michael Flynn-led event that happened up in Lancaster this weekend, right? Yeah. Friday and Saturday, was it here? Yes, this is a full-on Christian nationalist thing. I'm going to show you some clips. I went to the one in August that was in New York. A number of groups, Faith in Public Life and Faithful America and Vote Common Good, and all, we did a counter-protest at that event. Then I went to the event and paid a registration fee and went in and went inside the tent, and I'll show you little pieces inside of there and what's going on. But in there, the conversation is holy war stuff. It's definitely that, and it's using January 6th language as those are the martyrs in the holy war. Those are the heroes of these things, that they're not the villains, they're the victims of all of this. So this kind of language is going on all over. I'll show you this little clip here. This is from this special that was on Frontline, put together by the AP and Frontline. It came out just days ago, and it's called Michael Flynn's Holy War. The center of a lot of this new holy war business and the new Christian nationalism movement is led by General Michael Flynn. He's the one that led a lot of the United States intelligence efforts in Iraq that have been so deeply criticized. He was the one who was convicted by his own admission for violating federal crimes, and then was pardoned by Trump. He's that guy, and he's out pitching all this. So this special talks more detail about that. It's 50 minutes long. You can see it on pbs.com. It's out right now if you're interested in it. But this is just a little clip showing you what is up, part of this event, and then we'll show you some of this. And this is really
General Michael Flynn, ladies and gentlemen.
Michael Flynn's political influence has only grown since the January 6th insurrection.
Tomorrow, we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The fifth. Flynn has endorsed around 100 candidates for federal, state, and even local offices, raised millions, and helped launch the Reawaken America tour that mixes politics and religion.
I mean, there is a spiritual war and there is a political war. And they are going on. They're going on in this country right now. Since the November Virginia election across the country, we have overturned 200 school boards in this country. 200.
So Flynn is getting in front of audiences, and he's using Christian nationalist rhetoric to rally people who want to be fed that, because they want to be excited, mobilized.
They're going to shut our churches down, and they're going to tell you, you're going to get mandated to do this, you're going to get mandated to do that.
Christian nationalism threatens democracy because it is fundamentally anti-democratic by nature. It doesn't prioritize the incorporation or the participation of all Americans.
They say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you?
What is that? I'm an Irish Catholic.
We should skip that question. He is an Irish Catholic general who served
I'm a follower of Jesus. How's that?
33 years in the military serving this country.
So Michael Flynn is up to something. They've raised millions. Here's a little clip from that event. I start out with just a little commentary. I spent the afternoon there, and like you get at a lot of these things, like no one knew who I was there. I'm just a guy with a blue hat wandering around, and just the most delightful conversations with people. Sometimes we're talking about the stuff and disagreeing, and it was incredibly pleasant. Now the people up on the stage, not so much, but all the people sort of around, it was pleasant and slightly sad. And there was all the conspiracy theory stuff you can imagine, from 5G network stuff causing cancer to, all manner of things being hawked and sold and people sign-ups and all of that. So that's the kind of event it is. Then I went into the tent, and when I walked in, I heard the person up on the stage speaking, and he starts talking about what he saw at the insurrection and how they were just good American Walmart red state type people. And he uses this phrase, shofar blowing charismatics. which if you heard that phrase, you probably wouldn't have ever even thought about that phrase, a shofar-blowing charismatic. That's what you saw in that previous video clip. That's really common. He says that's kind of who it was. And then he goes into this whole thing about the insurrection was not a violent act at all. We were just there to do a good thing. So that's what's part of the holy war language of what's going on.
Here's the thing. There's all kinds of people. This guy in a Let's Go Brandon shirt, which I find to be profane. All right, here we go.
And I waded my way through crowds of hundreds, there must have been 1 million people there. And all I saw was good, wholesome, Walmart-type red state Republicans, shofar-blowing charismatics, and a few oddballs dressed up like soldiers. But they were in the minority.
Talking about the insurrection.
Why would they misrepresent our movement to the point that the Christian leadership in the body of Christ doesn't even know they're slandering their own brethren when they agree with the stupid insurrection narrative? We were there to pray and stand in unity to see a reversal of what we saw as a theft. And I'm telling you right now.
So what you've got is this really well-articulated argument about our movement. The Christian nationalism movement is now being slandered by Christian leaders who want to connect it to the insurrection. I don't know if you didn't see the video of the people in there praying, but it wasn't just slander. It's just response to what's actually going on. So this holy war narrative is enormously important. It's a big piece of how people get into it. And if you're going to engage in it, you're going to have to figure out how to talk about that. And then the final bit of how people get into this is this thing that's really probably the most fundamental. And that is the belief that the way God operates in the world is sometimes referred to as 7 mountains theory. Here's the quick down notion of this. Imagine the Mount Sinai scenario, and Moses goes up and receives the 10 Commandments and becomes a spokesperson for the call of God, right? Well, in this theory, there's not one mountain, there's 7 mountains in 7 areas of cultural influence. And the agenda is for the anointed leader of God to be appointed in each one of those sectors. So arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, religion. So what's happening is the idea is you're going to raise up these leaders from all over the world to lead in these sectors. Maybe they're Christian, maybe they're just chosen by God for God's purposes. Okay? If you're familiar with the National Prayer Breakfast that goes on in Washington, D.C., it's deeply rooted in this. That's what it's about, is raising up leaders from all over the world to fulfill, anointed leaders to fulfill God's plan in nations all over the world. So that's what they're expressly up to. Where it gets important for our country is that's how many of these people understand Donald Trump. He's the Cyrus from the Jewish text story. He's the king that's not all that right, but chosen by God. Okay, that's essential. If you've been wrapping your head like, why would those people vote for that guy? He's nothing like them. Okay, first of all, we should vote for people that are nothing like us. I mean, as long as they care about the common good, right? You shouldn't only vote for people like you. Like we're not birds of a feather or something. But if you're like, I just don't get this thing, like he's just opposite of everything, it's because he's seen as the anointed one. When I walked around the tent, went out and chatted with some people, and then came back in, that same preacher was still talking, and I came in the other side of the tent. This video I'm going to show you, the video is upside down when it first starts out here for some reason, which I don't know why, it just happened when it came in my computer, but I kind of like it because it reminds me of how I felt when I walked in that side of the tent. All right, this one's a little quieter, so if you can turn that volume up on the computer a bit. But what you're going to hear him say is the question is not, is the president a Christian? The question is he anointed by God? It's the 7 mountains theory. So here it is.
Walking into the
doesn't even know the Lord.
Great Awakening.
Because all the Christians, if you ever talk to Christians during an election cycle, here's what they care about. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian? They want to know if their candidate's a Christian. Is he a Christian? Let me tell you something. One of the worst presidents we ever had was Jimmy Carter, and he was a Christian. The question you should be asking isn't, is he a Christian? You should ask, is he anointed and chosen by God for the job?
People jump to their feet. Is he anointed and chosen by God for the job? Okay, that's the rationale. This is an enormous part of how people think about God's role in the world, and this is what leads people to Christian nationalism. I'm going to show you an example from the Christian Broadcasting Network. It was an interview with the then Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. The question is asked to Mike Pompeo, do you think Donald Trump is the Queen Esther, again with the Queen Esther in the war narratives? Do you think he's the Queen Esther? And then Mike Pompeo's answer.
You doing well? Walking firmly through the door, Mike Pompeo is a determined man. Both our Jerusalem Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell and I had the opportunity to interview the Secretary of State. It was part politics, part policy, and part spiritual, especially for a strong Christian who experienced a refreshing in the Holy Land.
Could it be that President Trump right now has been sort of raised for such a time as this, just like Queen Esther, to help save the Jewish people from an Iranian menace?
As a Christian, I certainly believe that's possible. It was remarkable. So we were down in the tunnels where we could see 3,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago, if I have the history just right, to see the remarkable history of the faith in this place. And the work that our administration has done to make sure that this democracy in the Middle East, of this Jewish state, remains. I'm confident that the Lord is at work here.
All right, again, Mike Pompeo is somebody of Christian faith. He's clearly not challenging his Christian faith. That's not the way you answer it as a Secretary of State. Yes, as a Christian, I think it's entirely possible that he's the Queen Esther. There's better answers than that. Look, part of the reason so many Christian nationalists are so fired up right now is because they felt like in the Trump administration was the first time that Christian nationalism was given a hearing. Not because of the belief of Donald John Trump, but because of the people that he put around him. Ben Carson, HUD Secretary, Seventh-day Adventist and big Christian writer and speaker. Betsy DeVos, Education Secretary, Christian conservative, Christian nationalist leanings there. Mike Pompeo, Mike Pence, Mike Flynn. That's just the Mikes that say to the people who are in Christian nationalism movements, these are our folks. It's the first time. And the reason they're out of their minds right now in frustration is they believe there's no way, as God's anointed one, could it be possible that he lost an election? So it must have been stolen. Can you imagine how those go together? It starts to make just a little bit of sense.
However,
that was Pat Robertson, by the way, in a little clip that he says, the mandate of heaven might be taken away from Donald Trump if he doesn't do more work in Syria. That's all he's saying. That I won't bother you. I'm tired of hearing these guys tonight, actually. But that's what he says. So it's this idea, again, that God places some people in certain places. All right. So all that's how people get into Christian nationalism. That's the stuff that feeds it. They're in there for a reason. What can we do? What can churches do? All right, so we'll take a couple of minutes around this. So do a big cleansing breath with me, would you? So we've had sort of two parts already. Christian nationalism, what fuels it, and how do people understand it? I want you to start framing, some level of understanding, but also empathy if you can. So what can churches do? I have a suggestion. That we break the no-talk rules that we have of faith and religion and civic engagement. For a lot of us, we really don't want to end up going down that side of the hill, so we stay over on another side of the hill and we don't talk about it at all. I'm not saying tell people who to vote for. Look, I've been a pastor for 30 plus years. People don't do what I say, so why would I spend my time telling them who to vote for? It's just a waste of breath. They did what you said. I mean, It's not about that. It's about deeper civic life, but it's breaking the no-talk rules. I mean, at some point, you just got to talk about Bruno. And if that's not funny to you, ask your grandkids or your kids about that. It's a great song, a great movie. But you got to talk about this stuff. Now, if you've ever gone to family therapy or family systems work, family systems therapists will say, hey, family systems all have no-talk rules, and when you get into a bad funk in a family, one of the things you got to do is start talking about the things you never talk about. But rule number one of breaking no-talk rules, don't just start talking about it, because you're not good at talking about it. You've got a bunch of bad habits. So find ways to get comfortable and get good at talking about it, develop some skills in talking about it, so that when you go to talk about it, you're not just stuck in the same pattern again over and over. So one of the ways you start talking about it is to say, we're going to start talking about it, and we're going to get good at talking about it. So it takes some time. I don't think sermons are the best places to talk about this. I've been a pastor, you got 50 weeks maybe, that people are going to pay without, you take the high holidays out, and you got 50 weeks roughly and a bunch of summer. That's not what people want to talk about there. So maybe you find other times or places, or you set up reading groups, or you set up, films or something to talk, curriculum like this. You find ways to start talking about it. Kristen Dumais is really good at this work. Somebody's carrying her book right there. Come to Michigan with us, and you'll probably get to see her at our event there. But she's written this book called Jesus and John Wayne. The subtitle is How Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation, but it's actually much broader. It's about the role of masculinity in Christian spirituality, and especially in Protestantism, and its function. And she's talking about what's going on and how churches and institutions and organizations are not stepping up to deal with these issues of Christian nationalism and the stuff that she writes about in her book. Individuals are carrying the weight, but churches are not. And I think it's really, really helpful. And Kristen is just excellent. She's a professor at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
But what I'm seeing right now, a couple of different things. This rift is real, right? It's real. It's cutting through families. It's cutting through communities, through churches. That people who thought they shared the same faith are now looking at each other across this chasm, saying, "Who are you?" Right? And what? How can you say these things? And realizing maybe that similar religious language has papered over these really incredible differences for a long time, and that just can't be ignored. So what we see happening is, I think Ed Setzer called it the evangelical reckoning, where we do see a number of evangelicals saying, no, this is not my faith. This is not, and now that I see it clearly, oh, we need to talk. This is not my Christianity. This is not my gospel. This is not my Jesus, right? And this is not my country. And so trying to change that, to stand out against it. And we see a lot of people leaving churches. We see people, some pastors getting fired, employees of Christian organizations either getting forced out or just walking away. That is very real, and it's happening. So the evangelical reckoning is happening on an individual level. What I also see is it's not happening much at all on an institutional level. And so when you have people, individuals leave organizations, leave churches, when you have Beth Moore leave the SBC, and this is being repeated on the local level all over the country right now, just enough is enough, or you get fired. Who remains, right? The people who remain are often more radicalized. The voices of dissent are removed, and they can go on with what they're doing. And so I see both of those dynamics at play right now. A number of people who had kept quiet for a very long time, who had been complicit in many ways in allowing things to get to where we are now, are saying enough is enough, and there are all kinds of individual acts of courage. And at the same time, I see that institutions are really persisting in these spaces, and in some ways, radicalizing.
Our slogan on our trailer is "Wake up, speak up, stand up," and I think that's what she's getting at. This is the way. The other thing I think we need to do is to start making civic engagement a discipleship project. How do we engage in civic life? It's something we can help people figure out how to do. It's a big, complex world out there, and to really help people think it through and to learn and to understand. Most people aren't interested in that stuff, for sure. But it might be that we're just in a period of time where staying silent about it, as Kristen put it, and other people taking over and talking about it just creates a vacuum that can be filled by too many other ideas. Shane Claiborne has written a great book called Jesus for President, Politics for Ordinary Radicals, and he sort of gets at this. And this is really helpful in trying to say, look, we got to talk a little bit in churches about the spirituality, faith side of all of this stuff as well. So here's Shane.
Yeah, I think that the beginning of it is to identify this collusion of the religion, the heretical religion of American nationalism with Orthodox, authentic Christianity. And the fact is, in Jesus and John Wayne, Kristen does it so well. She shows us that, the problem is not that Americans think John Wayne is the Messiah. It's that they wish the Messiah looked a little bit more like John Wayne. than the historical Jesus. You know, we don't really want a cross. We've got a gun. And if Jesus had had a gun, he might not have gotten killed. I literally saw that on a bumper sticker with the flag, right? So I think that's where we've got to identify that the religion of American nationalism has its own theology, manifest destiny, the doctrine of discovery, right? The religion of America has its own liturgy, its own holidays, its high holy days, July 4th. It's got its own creeds. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It's got its icons and symbols, the flag, you know, the national anthem is its worship song. And if you disrespect it, you're in trouble. So like we've got to bounce all of that off of Jesus and off of the real gospel. And I think we literally have a choice. As Jesus said, we can't serve two masters. We've got to decide who we will serve.
I think it's really good encouragement for churches to think about that kind of stuff, not to turn against our own faith or anything, of course not, but to ask people to figure out, turn against our country, but ask people to compare these things and realize, hey, we live in a complex world, and let's not mix these two. You know, sometimes we think about Christian nationalism as if it's like a little side salad. You're just going to pull off the onions because you forgot to say, please give it to me without the onions. It might actually be more like a smoothie for a lot of people, that it's been so mixed up, you can taste the flavor in there, but you can't figure out how to pull it out and pull it apart. That's really hard. That deconstructing of these faiths is really complicated. And then let's be honest about the practices that subtly support the notion of Christian preference and power. Look, Christianity gets a lot of leeway in this country. Chaplains and weddings, and I get to stand in front of people in Minnesota and say, therefore, by the authority of the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. I don't show up at somebody's house closing and be like, hey, title company, hey, buyer, let me bring the two of you together. But I do it around weddings because we've negotiated that out. But let's just notice, for some people, that starts to hint a little bit that that's more the way things ought to be, and some people get uncomfortable. So churches can start to notice this stuff and pay attention and name it and recognize it. I don't have to undo all of it. It's part of breaking the no-talk rules. All right, what can individuals do? Two simple things. Just write these down. It won't be a problem. You'll have this settled. Empathy and engagement. The two hardest things for human beings to do in a conflictual environment, right? See the world from somebody else's vantage point. To understand deeply what motivates people. There's three really good questions you can always ask somebody about some belief they have or some practice they have. One is, what do you believe? What did you do? It's interesting. Really do ask, too. If you have Christian nationalist friends or family members, ask them, what do you think about this? Maybe find those poll questions and ask them what they think about the role of religion in our society. You can ask them why they believe it. Super important. Tell me a bit about why you came to that conclusion. How did you get there? And really listen. I mean, empathy is not beginning with your own end in their mind, right? But the third question you can ask, and this one you can't normally say just so bluntly, you have to really deeply listen, is what function does that belief have in your life? What does it do for you? How does it operate in you? When you start messing around with someone's core belief and you're not caring about what it does for them, it's like tearing down a load-bearing wall. The resistance goes really high. So figuring out, how does that function for you? You can hear from Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove in a minute. He has this great line. He's like, they're not just nuts. There's something going on. Jonathan has written a couple of really great books, one called Reconstructing the Gospel, Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. I almost said shareholder religion, but it's Finding Freedom from Slaveholder Religion. And then one called Revolution of Values, Reclaiming Public Faith for the Common Good. No association, but he's a partner in our work. He works with the Poor People's Campaign and Moral Mondays and the Reverend William Barber all the time. So if you know Jonathan, you might know him from that work. And I think this bit of empathy right here is really important.
Yes, indeed, because you can't assume that the people who believe this are crazy in their context. But again, back to the empirical data that they were just laying out, there's far too many people to think that this is just, some sort of aberration that needs to be treated in individuals. No, this is a culture that is feeding people lies, reinforcing those lies, and inviting people to understand themselves as part of what I think people of faith, Christians, can only call an idolatrous worship of the nation as the kind of ultimate end. And the alternative to that has to be building a better community to invite people into. And I think, while we need to be building culture in all kinds of ways everywhere, any strategic effort to address this has to especially focus on building community in rural places, and in particular in places that have been media deserts, because that is where, to get into the weeds a little bit, the Council for National Policy that I mentioned has had the executive leadership of all of those media companies that Sam mentioned, from American Family Radio to Breitbart News to Fox. They've all been on that council. They've all coordinated with each other for decades. And what they have done is they have strategically gone into places where there are not local newspapers anymore, where there's not local radio, and they have blanketed it with their message. So it's entirely possible, if your pastor participates in the Family Research Council's pastor program and takes their free literature, and if you are a member of the Republican Party and the NRA, which by the way have also coordinated very closely with this group, and if you listen to American Family Radio when you're driving the tractor out in the field, it's entirely possible that you never hear any other narrative in your life, right? There is no alternative in the place where you are. And so you would be crazy in that context not to believe this stuff. So I think anybody who knows that this is a lie has a moral obligation to try to enter these spaces and interrupt the wraparound culture that has been created by this propaganda campaign.
And the most important thing is to love first. Love in the middle, and then love at the end. The goal is not changing people's minds, right? 3 things are going to last, I think. Love, one of the greatest of them all. That's the point. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do some Q&A here in a minute. We're going to introduce you to Nick Brock. He's got a poetic piece that he put together, and I think it's a really great sort of cleanser for a lot that's becoming age. So if you want to think for a minute, we'll have a few moments here at the end for some responses and some reactions, a couple of groups, people to introduce you all to. But this is Nick. I mentioned him earlier. Nick lives in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and has been working on this piece. This is the 3rd time he's going to do it fully by memory.
Yeah, and hopefully I can nail it in front of everybody here, so we'll give it a go. The original Declaration of Independence rests within a frame made of pure titanium that's coated with gold. The glass enclosing it is tempered, laminated, and calibrated to a thickness of 3/8 of an inch in order to block out harmful UV light. And 70 bolts around the frame apply 300 pounds of pressure per linear inch, sealing it in. Inside the frame, parchment made from 1776 sits atop a perforated aluminum platform so that moisture can reach the back side of it in order to keep it supple, and all the while inert argon kept at approximately 40% humidity and 60 degrees Fahrenheit staves off the oxidation process. And most grandiose of all, the case housing the Declaration, along with the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, collectively known as the Charters of Freedom, are lowered beneath the ground every night into a custom-built vault made to withstand a nuclear blast. But despite these advances for preservation and security, the ability to detect problems is growing faster than the capability to solve them. And most importantly, figuring out what to do if a problem arises. And so I think it is with us, friends. Though our concern reside not with the preservation and security of parchment and ink from nearly 2.5 centuries years old, but with preserving and securing within the hearts and minds of the people a readiness to re-examine, reimagine, and reinterpret the guarantees of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness when they become crooked, narrow, and hell-bent on making America great in the name of me, the people, instead of we the people. What then shall we do, you might ask? I'd like to suggest Scripture, American Scripture. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln would use only 272 words for delivering his Gettysburg Address. The speech, lasting just 2 minutes long, would enter the lexicon of American Scripture as one of the most powerful and concise statements of freedom our nation has ever heard. And drawing upon his unwavering quest for pursuing the true spirit of our nation's founding creed, Lincoln would posit a new vision of America amidst the chaos and rancor of a civil war. So standing thus on the blood-stained fields of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Lincoln would stand up on a wooden platform and say, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Lincoln would continue on, but in a larger sense. It is for us to be here dedicated to this unfinished work thus far so nobly advanced. It is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. Lincoln's invitation to participate in the nation's unfinished work of equality would indeed usher in a new birth of freedom, rooted in the sentiment that American exceptionalism, thenceforward and forever, shall include those pushed to the very margins of society, the outcasts, and that to truly make and keep America great, this exceptionalism is incumbent upon each and every citizen patriot of this nation, no matter their religious creed, color, national origin, sex, or marital status. Or in other words, love your neighbor as yourself. In the hands of Lincoln, the Declaration of Independence became a living document, willing and able to inspire faith, hope, and love of country for the common good, whilst confronting conspiracy, secession, insurrection, and a rebellion against the peace and sanctity and union of the United States government. Friends, are you picking up what I'm putting down here? Ultimately, though, the authority for preserving the principles of the Declaration rests not just in the hands of presidents and politicians, but also in we, the people, poets, prophets, preachers, and you. Yes, you, ma'am, and yes, you, and you, sir. Which brings me back to where I began, with parchment and ink, what to do, and this Sharpie. There were 56 signers willing to sign their name to the Declaration of Independence, an act of treason, mind you, against the motherland of the British Crown. Chief among them were Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and the like. The first, however, was John Hancock, with his signature best remembered for being the largest and most flamboyant over all the rest. Anecdotes from American folklore suggest that Hancock wrote in such a manner as to make his defiance against King George III more than obvious to the naked eye and to those needing spectacles. However, no historical document remains as to why he wrote in such a manner. But what we do know is this: someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Someone had to go first and pave the way for the others. Friends, one way we'd like to share and invite you into the work of Vote Common Good is by having you sign on with us. So as I'm sure that when you walked in here, you saw our rather larger-than-life orange bus that says, faith, hope, and love, not insurrections and Christian nationalism. And I invite you to sign your name, city, and state on that bus. Because when you do so, we will take you with us throughout the entire Midwest or the East Coast, and we will share your story wherever we go. And moreover, we will share the work of this church here. So if you'd like to sign that bus, you can meet me at the back of the room afterwards. And finally, I'd like to leave you with the closing words of Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Though the world will little note, nor long remember what we say here, may our government of the people, by the people, and for the people never perish from the earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Lincoln took 2 minutes. We've taken 2 hours to the minutes, by the way, from the time we started. So I know it's been a long night. You're going to take a couple of questions here if you have them, but I also want you to make sure you know that Stacy, if you're going to cut out first and you haven't talked to Stacy yet, Stacy's here with a group called Red, Wine, and Blue, a really great partner of the work that we love to do. They have these great little stickers. You'll find them around in some of the places. Just another suburban woman causing trouble. If you don't know Red, Wine, and Blue yet, just the best. So I'm going to say something in a minute. And if you know any other organizations that are doing this kind of work or we should be partnered with, please let us know. So please do sign our bus. And if you haven't yet been on our website to sign up and give us your email, we'd love to email you. We email about 3 or 4 times a week during all this to keep up with you. So we'd love that. And we're funded by viewers like you. So if that's one of your questions, people often ask, you can make a donation at the back if you want to. Obviously no expectation of that. But we do take credit cards and cash and checks. And if you're into Bitcoin, you can do Bitcoin. Or, as I like to joke, just bring the marijuana straight to the table and we'll exchange it. I don't know what else people do with Bitcoin. But so any questions, comments, or anything else, understanding that it's that we're at time. But comments, thoughts? Yes, please.
The politicians that are involved in this, do you think they truly in their heart believe this, or is this just something for them to gain power?
So the question is, in my interpretation, the politicians who are engaged, do they truly believe this, or is this a way to gain power? I choose to believe that if people say this is sincere, to just begin with that assumption. For me, it doesn't do any good to sort of assign an assumption to someone that they won't agree to themselves. So there are some people who fund Christian nationalism and talk about, who aren't into it at all themselves. They just know it's a political means to an end. So if that's what they say, then that's it. If they say, I really do believe this is sincere from my heart, I choose to believe them that way. So that I don't know how to assign. I just know there's enough of all of those people that you kind of have to work in all the areas. I don't know. Do you have a sense? What do you think?
I think some people truly believe it, but I feeling watching these people and thought it's their way to power, and I get the sense they don't really believe it, but they'll just
Yeah, I think if you get to a lot of these folks and you find out what does it do for you, it gives me power. That's the function. That's more clear than the what or the why in those 3 questions. So yeah, I mean, I do sort of, but we ask ourselves that question all the time, like, what are we doing driving around in a bus for all these months and all, right? Like, what's that doing for you? What's eating you, Gilbert Grape? Like, what are you all up to out here with this? So something's driving all that. Something's driving that bus, and it's not just Joe. Something's going on, and what's that all about? By the way, I forgot my favorite little joke. There's 4 things that get us around this country. Faith, hope, love. You know what the 4th is? Diesel. Diesel gets us around. We want you in the tank with us, so make a donation in the back. All right, that's my favorite joke of the night. Anybody else comments, questions about what's driving us? Or yes?
The reason I came tonight wasn't that I don't know about Christian nationalism. I still am not quite sure. However,
Yeah, Christian nationalism, I would say, is the belief that Christianity is preferenced in the United States and the government gains its power from Christianity, that kind of stuff. Yeah, so, I mean, this is the thing about, like, how identical is the U.S. Christian nationalism movement to fascism or Nazism? I don't think it's a one-to-one, but I do like the phrase non-identical repetition. So it's not exactly the same, but it is some repeating patterns that have never gone away. Is it KKK? Is it that movement from the 1770s and 80s up through the 1930s and 40s in the US? Yeah, it kind of does look a lot like that. It also can look like fascism in some parts of the country or in some parts of the world. So it's not identical, so I wouldn't suggest just taking a one-to-one and say, oh, what it is this. Maybe you heard and picked up when Andrew Whitehead said, it is its own thing. It's not just one of these. There's something else alive and well in the United States that ultimately, with a little time, we might step back and be able to describe it more accurately. Right now, we're in the midst of it. I think the COVID pandemic is a really good metaphor. Remember when we didn't know what to call it? Called it the Rona? Remember all that stuff? And then it was called like the Corona, and the Corona beer people were like, no, no, no. And then it was the Delta variant. The Delta people were like, no, no, no. And so we didn't know what to call it, but we knew there were symptoms and how to respond. We're in the midst of a new movement of Christian nationalism, some that has a supreme leader kind of narrative, cult-like narrative to it, some that doesn't have that at all. There's some Christian nationalist movements that don't want to see, Donald Trump put in by the power of God through prayer. They're not doing that. It's more complex than that. It's an entire ecosystem that more than 50% of the population believes. So, can you name it with one word? Got this 1 word, 10 word, 100 word thing, right? 1 minute, 10 minute, 2 hour thing. I have nothing wrong with one word, as long as we can also have a 10 word and a 100 word response. So, I would too. I mean, that's part of the history you can't talk about. What we tried to do tonight was just talk about like what's happening now. This Freedom Bus that's going, that's part of Power, and they have some seminars like this going. You should go on their website and follow those. They have other presenters that are talking about longer historic pieces and other stuff because there's so much to this. Again, 50%, so you're talking, 150 million people don't all think one thing. There's a whole ecosystem of this stuff that disagrees with itself, and a lot of conflict inside the system and everything else too. So it's a very dynamic circumstance. So this was all really like, January 6th forward kind of reflection, which is only a snapshot. There's a whole lot of other stuff, and there'll be future things. But we're sort of in it right now. Great thoughts, thank you. Yeah, Rene Girard's work on mimetic theory is super important. If that's new to you, talk to either of us afterward if you want to know more about it. And the scapegoat theory and how our societies organize around this is what we're seeing playing out. If you know some people that you feel like hold Christian nationalist ideas, sympathies, actions in your life some way, they are your best expert. My advice is to follow them down whatever path they will give you insight into why they think what they do, what they think, and how it functions in their life. Now that's if you want to engage with them individually and personally like that. Like some of it might be, no, you're going to engage in such a way that hopefully it's not as triggering. You kind of understand it. You got your head around it. You've got a few more handholds. It's not just a blur. You know, you're not watching a sport you've never watched be played before and like, I have no idea what's going on. Is that tennis? Is that racquetball? Is that ping pong? No, that, my friends, is pickleball, which by the way is a great sport. But if you've never seen people play pickleball, you're like, they're on a tennis court, but I don't understand the paddles, I don't understand the nets, and what are they doing, and don't know how it's played. There's a whole game being played here, you might not know how. So maybe you don't want to play the game, maybe you just want to understand the game. But if you have someone who's playing the game, I don't mean to make light of it, it's a metaphor, right? Ask them what they're doing in the game, how it works, what they're thinking. The answers are not very, look, you ask anybody about your deep core belief, and then you ask them to justify why they hold it. Most of us are like, I can't defend it. I'm just living with it. It's with me. I don't know, like I'm affected by it. So that's where a lot of people are. And that's why I think deep empathy and deep listening and personalizing this, if you know people, is really, really helpful. Now, I've got my own story on this. I have family members that are big into this stuff. And I just feel like they never tell me the truth when we talk about this stuff. Like I can't really get anywhere. It's just sort of a brick wall. So I spend time with, friends as opposed to family members talking about it. That's how I've found my own way to navigate that kind of thing. Like maybe they don't think I'm a trustworthy conversation partner. I don't know, but I can't get anywhere with those folks. I have to find others. Anybody else? Piece of advice or yes?
So the church that I'm going to, I found out today we're going to start one of the adult ed classes is going to start a new series in being able to discuss politics with, learning how to discuss politics with civility.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would believe that as Christians, or people of faith, regardless of whether you're Christian or not, is it something that if we can learn how to do, it will help us in being able to talk about those? Why do you believe what you believe, and how does it function for you? Or, because what I heard you say earlier tonight is that we can't take more division.
I think we can't make enemies out of each other, or if we do have enemies, we should treat them the same as we do those that we love. Would be my advice. Stole that from a religious teacher. So that's just a better way, is to not make a distinction between our enemies and our friends and how we treat them. So our same amount of love we should extend. And yes, learning how to be in good conversations with people is really important. It's just hard to do on stuff that we don't put a lot of weight on. Yeah, so anytime we can learn how to develop new skills to talk about things would be very helpful. But I will say this, us talking about this stuff is not sufficient to solving these issues. There is a political movement that wants to use Christian nationalism for power, for boundaries, and for order, and people are looking to put that into place. So in addition to deep empathy and deep understanding in a personal level, I would encourage us to elect the kinds of officials who don't represent these kinds of ideas. It would be better to have elected officials not holding to ideas of limited power and boundaries and order that comes through some kind of a religious narrative, or any restriction. Anything that restricts our nation, we should vote for other people. So there's kind of two things going on. There's the body politic and the trouble we're in, and then there's the personal life. And at some point, there's a Venn diagram of those where they overlap, but they're not exactly the same. So we have to be able to do sort of both of those. So I just commend to you, November 8th really matters.
Very active in the military. Very high
I echo those concerns. The militarization of this stuff, watching the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys move with military tactical work in the insurrection, knowing that General Michael Flynn and that other people who were in the intelligence agencies were arrested. Not Michael Flynn was arrested for that, but other people were arrested who were high-ranking people in military intelligence as a part of the insurrection, tells us that that's probably not the only circumstance of this. The number of people who are on the Oath Keepers mailing list, deeply concerning. If this really worries you, maybe don't. I don't know if it's, well, I'll just say that Frontline report on Michael Flynn's Holy War, the reason they use that phrase Holy War is not because of the political work, but it's the hangover from the work that was being done in Iraq and Afghanistan, seeing that as a holy war, and now that coming to the United States. So the militarization of this is deeply, deeply concerning. To me too. And that's not going to be solved by a good, healthy conversation. Now, at every level of all of our society, people have to be doing this, right? The government has to break its no-talk rules on this stuff too, you know? The January 6th Commission needs to talk about the influence of Christian nationalism on this. Like, there's a lot that we can do in our country to not bury this stuff and to get it out and to keep it out in the open. And at the same time, recognizing that, you know, these are ongoing battles, as I think Nick's poetry piece gave us so well. Yeah, we've faced down these kinds of circumstances before, and their threats are real. And are we going to survive? I hope so. I think so. I believe in it. We normally finish with a song, but our musician's not here tonight, so we don't have a song to sing. But usually a song gets you out of all that tension. Anybody else? Yeah.
So, I was wondering if you could get a copy of my poetry. I guess you could, in a way, if you have Substack, or if you know of Substack, you can find me my name, Nick Rock, and it's on there.
Or take Nick with you. Nick got to us because we hosted an event in Michigan a couple of years ago, and we always have this bit where we say, we really do want you in the tank with us, and we want you on the bus, so sign our bus, or get on the bus, we're going here, we're going there, and come with us if you want. Nick's like, seriously? Okay, I think I'll come with you, and now he literally travels around with us. So I'll say this, we're going to be up in, Lancaster tomorrow, or on Tuesday night. We're holding a more political focused event. We're going to be doing one of these trainings all around this area of Pennsylvania and over to Pittsburgh and over to New Jersey. So if you want to come join us at any of the rest of these, or you have friends or family or other people you think want to be in these conversations, we'd love for you to spread the word and all the rest of it. Can you just say a minute about red, wine, and blue, and then we'll call it a night?
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me. I just want to, for anybody who's not aware of the organization Red, Wine, and Blue, we are a suburban women group run by suburban women. We of course accept allies as well. On the ground in the swing states this year with a phenomenal Get Out and Vote initiative. Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and North Carolina. We are a fun group, as is evidenced by our name. We like to have fun but get stuff done. We have an amazing relational organizing campaign that is so easy to participate in. It's friends talking to friends to get out the vote. We have 16 days left, so we have plenty of time to do that. Probably a time commitment, realistically, would be about 10 minutes a day up until the election to participate. We have an amazing, easy tool that links you to the voter file. You talk to your friends, make sure they have a plan to vote. You enter them in that. We know you've spoken to them, and the network grows, and so on and so on and so on. And they send it to friends, and we're creating networks in this area. This is just our first year. We intend to be here for the long haul. We are in South Central PA for a reason, because we have the numbers to defeat extremism here. But we've got to get out and vote. So I'll be happy to talk to anybody about it. And
how many people are in that Facebook group?
Probably about 300,000.
300,000 people. They started a couple of years ago. It's the greatest voting political organization I know of. It's just the best. So yeah.
Thank you.
So once again, some of us just long to be a suburban woman again. So get all the good things. Okay, anything else? Anything good for the order of the peoples? Can we just stand up and take a collective breath together? My wife is a yoga instructor, and she's like, you and your heady jabbering, let the people breathe. All right. I don't know if you do that belly breathing, you know, where you just sort of start low and you just... May we breathe on one another a spirit of goodness and gentleness and kindness, self-control, and love. Let's never win an election and make our country ungovernable. Let's never give up. And I'm still talking. All right. No, I'll stop talking. Go ahead and breathe. Thanks for being here tonight. We really appreciate it. We do sell the signs. Yeah, we sell them back. You put that baby up with a Shapiro sign, and people are like, "What is?" Yes, please take one from back there.
There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we stop, children. What's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. There's battle lines being drawn. Nobody's right if everybody's wrong. The young people speaking their minds are getting so much resistance from behind. Time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. What a field day for the heat. 1,000 people in the street, singing songs and carrying signs. Mostly say hooray for our side. It's time we stop. Hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Strikes deep into your life, it will creep.